right now I'm driving through Indio, California. If anybody knows what Indio is, you know that Indio is very hot this time of year. So coming into summertime. Indio is not a place you want to be. Easily hits the hundreds early on in the year, and they stay there for a while. That got me thinking that Indio is a desert, and I live in the desert, but I definitely don't live in the Indio desert, thank God. I live in the Chihuahuan desert. And that got me thinking, how I prep at home would be totally different than how someone elsewhere in the country might prep. I used to live in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Beautiful place, love it. Love to go back and visit sometime. Amazing seafood, probably some of the best seafood in the country. Love Massachusetts, very, very, very beautiful state. Horrible, horrible politics and outrageous cost of living. Would not recommend living there. Anyways, got me thinking, when I was living in Massachusetts, I would be prepping a little differently than I do right now. And that's because it's a different region, different climate, and it's got specific requirements, is what I would say. So, living in New Mexico right now, I would not be prepping the same as I would have in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, I would have been prepping to stay warm over cooling off, because Massachusetts has some brutal winters. Anyone who lives in New England definitely knows that, or if they've been to New England in the wintertime, y'all definitely know about Massachusetts winters. They are horrible. They're very beautiful, but they're horrible. So in Massachusetts, you would be prepping firewood on top of firewood on top of firewood. Your main thing is you want to stay warm. In New Mexico, where I live, in the Chihuahuan Desert, staying warm is important in the wintertime because it does snow and it does get cold where I live. Granted, it's not as cold as Massachusetts gets. So if you're like me and you live in the middle of the desert or in a hot place, your preps might look more like ways to stay cool, ways to stay out of the sun, and lots and lots and lots of hydration. Obviously, food and water, important one. That's a general prep, but emphasize on the hydration part, because out in the desert, the sun will zap the life out of you real quick and in a hurry. In places like New England, you're not going to have that issue as much. Yeah, it gets hot in New England, but it's not the desert hot. Another thing out for region specific is, I would say, techniques. So you're going to want to find your best technique for like one or two planting. So in the desert, yeah, you can plant plants, plant vegetables, crops, and all sorts of things. You can do that in the desert. There's nothing stopping you from doing it in the desert. You're just going to have to have a different technique if you want to grow fruit and vegetables in the desert than if you were in Iowa or Nebraska or Kansas or something like that, or even the East Coast, Northeast. It can be done out in the desert. You just have to come up with region-specific techniques, and you've got to plan whatever you give, whenever you water your plants and how you water your plants. You definitely, out in the desert, you definitely don't want to water on top of the plants, because that could burn the plants, and it allows for extra evaporation when you don't want it. Things like up in Iowa, you're not going to have that issue. Well, I mean, yeah, you're still going to have the whole evaporation thing, but it's not going to be as big of a deal as it would be out in the desert. So yeah, what I'm getting at is pretty much, especially if you're new at prepping or new to the lifestyle in general, then, you know, obviously have the food, water, shelter, supplements, you know, all that stuff. That's all general stuff. You know, you're gonna want a good supply of that. I would say, you know, like a year's worth of food, water, something like that. Don't just focus on that. Focus on, you know, you're also gonna want to focus on regional specific requirements, like are you going to need to have more water for your location, and what you would in general. Like, rule of thumb is 1 gallon of water per person for drinking water only. So maybe out in the desert, you know, instead of 1 gallon of water, maybe you're going to have 2 gallons of water per person for drinking only. It's not including water for bathing and washing dishes, shit like that. Shelter out in the desert is going to be more important, in my opinion, than it would be in the Rocky Mountains, where natural shelters are more prevalent, and natural shelters out in the desert are not. You guys get what I mean? So that's what this is all about, pretty much. Absolutely have your basic preps, but focus on your region area, your regional area as well, because that's going to determine if you're going to have more of a certain kind of prep or not. And, you know, some places you might need a certain item where you're at, then, you know, if you lived in another place, you wouldn't need that item. Like, you live out in the middle of the desert, there's really no need for fishing poles, because there's not a lot of bodies of water, especially in New Mexico. But if you live in Florida, yeah, fishing poles I would highly recommend. Shit like that. Y'all have a good one.